good, America? This is Big Flo, part of the Big Flo and O Show. Today I've got my special guest, Alan TRIEU, joining us from Midwest Sports. Say hi, Oliver. One of these days, get that
What's
right.
up, America? Reg is, as of yet, not to get that intro right, so I was wondering what the over and under would be on the intro, and he almost forgot me. So, Alan, what's up, buddy? Glad to have you.
Hold on.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Let me add him to the show. So, I think that's going to be kind of my shtick, is I'm going to mess that up every time we do it. So, right now I'm batting 1,000. Let me see. Hold on a second. Move this over. Sorry, I got a little... we're our own production team here, so the least qualified guy is the one doing it right now. Hold on, got you. So there we go. So everybody listen, we've got Alan TRIEU, Midwest recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports. How's it going, Alan?
Going well, guys. Thanks for having me. And I actually just did my first Skype live broadcast of a commitment about 2 weeks ago, and I was my own producer too, so I know exactly what you're going through right now.
Yeah, hey, whatever. We're grassroots over here. We try to look official with little headphones and microphones, but besides that, we're just kind of winging this.
I officially am going to call Reg Fumbelina when it comes to the sticks. He's not much of a DJ, but he's a heck of a co-host. Alan, you know what? I've been a fan of yours for years. I had a godson named Anthony Matty who I think it was about 7 or 8 years ago, was coming up through the system. And so that's when I became a fan. I started reading your blog, so on and so forth. And just to give people an idea of what you do and how you do it, tell us how you got started in podcast. Well, not podcast, I'm sorry, in ranking high school recruits.
Yeah, so actually I started off in middle school. We had to do a project, and it was build a website about something you're interested in. And I started putting up NFL draft evaluations, and didn't say how old I was. And a couple of years later, found myself credentialed for the NFL Combine as a teenager. Started doing draft stuff. And then had a couple of, I played in high school a little bit and had some guys in my conference and some guys even on my own team that were trying to get recruited. So back then, I'm sure as you guys know, you had to have a VHS machine and know how to go tape to tape. And I was the only one that knew how to do that. So I started making highlight tapes for some of these guys. And that's when I got into recruiting and eventually found my way to what was scout.com at the time. And they basically say, hey, you can shut down your draft site and come over here and work for us. And that's how it started. I think I was about 18, 19 when I shut the site down and signed my first contract with them.
So scout.com was yours?
It wasn't mine. No, they were already operating. I was operating an NFL draft site, and they basically said, we'll give you a contract, let you work through college, but you got to shut your draft site down. So then I became part of scout.com, which then a couple of years ago merged with 24/7.
Oh, I got you. That's fantastic. And I've been watching.
Okay, what year was that about?
So I graduated high school in 2003. I think I went to the Combine in somewhere around that time period, and I started really covering recruiting full time in 2005.
That's awesome. You know, it's funny because I started watching probably 2005, 2006. So you were actually just new to the business.
Oh, man, I was fresh-faced, didn't know what I was doing. They'd send me to high school games. I get lost all the time. I was trying to schedule my college classes to where I had no class on Friday, so I could leave and take off and drive over to the other side. As I drove to Cincinnati from the Grand Rapids several times on Friday nights, while my friends would be, hey, we got this social event, partying. I'd be driving to Cincinnati for high school football games, so everybody thought I was crazy.
So how do you go about...
You're originally from Cincinnati?
Hey, how do you go about recruiting people? I mean, talk us through the process. Like, how do you find the kids? How do you go forward? How do you evaluate? There's so many kids out there for you to evaluate. How are you going through that process?
Yeah, so number one, like you said, the discovery phase, that's the first phase. And there's any number of ways that can happen. Sometimes it's as simple as a kid sends us a link. I click it, watch it, and say, okay, this guy's somebody we need to be aware of. Other times a coach or a parent or a teammate or somebody will put us on to them and send us the link. Other times I might be at a camp, and I'm sure you guys have been to those camps where there's a bunch of kids, but somebody that we don't know catches our eyes. We talk to the kid and we get them from there. Other times I might be at a game in the fall, and I'm there to watch somebody, but as I'm going up and down the roster and watching the game, I'll see somebody else that clearly has ability, and we'll put that guy in our database. And so that's the starting point, is finding them. I don't have any specific way that I do. I'll find them however I can, but those are the three most common methods. And we have a big database that we put guys into, and that really helps us stay organized. I think that's the biggest part for us. You mentioned the number of guys out there that are trying to get evaluated and get scholarship offers and end up playing at the next level. Being organized and making sure that I'm going through those lists and knowing who's who is probably one of the most important parts of the job.
What do you say to a kid that hasn't, maybe can't get to a camp or hasn't done that stuff, that's trying to get noticed or trying to get on your radar just to get the publicity?
Well, first of all, this year is obviously extremely different. And the kids who are going through the process right now during the pandemic are going to have to understand that they may have to be a little bit more patient and roll with the punches a little more than the guys in the previous years. They're not getting spring evaluation right now. Looks like they probably won't get a camp season. Who knows what the actual fall season will look like? So right now you have to stay prepared, and whenever you get that opportunity, you need to be ready for it, because these guys are probably going to have less time to catch everybody's attention than ever before. So right now, I would say the biggest thing you can do is keep working, making sure that you're staying in shape and not allowing the quarantine to let you get out of shape. And then from there, have some of that stuff ready to go. I know a lot of guys are shooting home workout videos. I know college coaches, I don't think they're offering anybody off of a backyard workout, but they are definitely paying attention and making sure that they're seeing some things that they would otherwise be trying to see in person during the spring evaluation period.
I watch Twitter a lot. My son's going through the recruiting process. Oliver's got a son that's just left off of college to play football. So, we're in that time frame. So I think there'll be a lot of people in our group of friends that are really interested in this, because, a lot of guys are getting recruited. It's very hard to make sense out of it. If you look at Twitter, you'll see a rash of offers going out. Then you'll see people that some schools are offering like crazy, some schools aren't. How are you seeing this recruiting thing change? Because in Oliver, in my day, 25, 30 years ago, you got scholarships after you were done playing your senior year, right? You didn't really get this stuff all early. So now that it's kind of changed, and I think it's changing every couple of years even more, how do you make sense of it? What do you think is going on with this recruiting process and why it's changing?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, people ask me that every year, and parents are always asking me why I don't write a book or something about the process. And the reason that I don't is what you mentioned. It changes. By the time I got that thing published, there would be a bunch of stuff that changed that I would then want to edit it. So it's just a continual learning process for us. And I think the parents that go through the process, many parents who have an older child go through the process and then have a younger one go through it several years later, will know that it's already changed from the oldest to the youngest. So I think for parents right now and for kids right now going through this process, understand that every school is also kind of in your boat, where they're trying to learn how this year is going to be different. And they tell me they change their philosophy every week. So at first, some schools were going to wait on offers because they didn't want to make mistakes without being able to see these guys live. And they also didn't know if they were going to get their summer camps. Now that the picture is getting clearer, I think schools might be a little bit more willing to take a chance on a guy right now, a guy who may be a borderline offer for them, just because who knows when that college is going to be able to get that kid on campus for a workout, if at all. It might not happen at all. So I think, the thing I've been telling kids is the number of scholarships each school has to give is still the same. So they're going to get filled somehow. You just have to find your way into one of those spots, and the process for you might be different than your buddies who went through the process last year. Definitely is going to be different.
Absolutely. You're seeing a lot of kids, a lot of these schools now. Your site's actually the best when it comes to this, because you can look at an offer, click on the school, find out how many people they've offered at each position, and go down the line and really check it out. And you see a lot of the same names on the same school, the same quarterbacks offered by like 700 schools, right? And they're going through, so obviously they're all fighting over him. You look at some of these offers that we've been hearing are not real. They're non-committable offers, so to speak. What do you think about that? What would you say about the validity of offers that are coming early?
Well, there's definitely tiers to the offers. There's hey, offer, you can commit right now. Tell me right now if you want. And then there's the offer that you said, which is committable and may not ever be committable. And then you have some offers that are in between, which when you reference their board, there's a pecking order a lot of the time at these schools. So you may have an offer that will eventually be committable, but maybe it depends on what's above you, or maybe they're holding you at bay a little bit because there might be a guy that they're waiting on. And so, and also those boards change all the time based on new evaluations, new information. And so you mentioned the quarterbacks. Yeah, 40 schools are recruiting the same one quarterback. Once that guy makes the decision, then you have 39 schools that are then on to the next quarterback on the list. A lot of the time right now, these recruitments, you're kind of you're being bottlenecked by one or two kids that haven't made their decisions yet. And once they do, it bumps a bunch of people up on the board. So committable offers, I think the biggest thing for kids to do is to try to, I know it gets exciting and you want to put out these offers and you want people to know that you have offers from these schools and they post them on social media. But the most important thing when you get an offer is to communicate with that staff and do your best to learn whether or not that offer is immediately committable or not.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. You talked about the bottleneck in there, and it's funny. It's a philosophy I've had. Some of these positions, especially I think like the quarterback position, it seems like, again, everyone's after the top quarterback. We've got a kid named J.J. McCarthy. Obviously, everyone knows him. I think he did the country a favor by committing to Michigan as a sophomore, because now the other schools can say, all right, let me go on to my other quarterback. Do you find that position by position to be an issue, or is it kind of across the board where they get their top guys and then they have their second tier?
At every position, there is some sort of hierarchy there and some sort of order that they go through, and there's committable and non-committable offers at every position. I think it's more maybe common at quarterback. Quarterback's a different beast because most of the time schools will only take one. In some rare cases, the school might take two, but in other extremely rare cases, the school might take none. So you're dealing with a different number situation than you do if you're an offensive lineman and a school might take 5, 6, 7 offensive linemen. You're not maybe being held up by other guys as much as a position at quarterback, which is not only low in numbers, but is extremely important. If they're going to take one, they're going to take the right guy. So I kind of think quarterback is a little bit of its own beast. And then from there, you should be the kid and the parent should be able to watch a football game and understand that there's one quarterback on the field, there's maybe 2 or 3 running backs that play, and there's several offensive linemen. So just kind of knowing the depth chart and knowing what the numbers are at the position you play, that should help you start to navigate the recruiting process as well. If there's less of you on a roster, that means there's less of you, less spots for a guy like you in the recruiting class also.
That's true.
Alan, I have 2 questions. Number one, I know that we're in an unusual situation when it does come to this upcoming season, but generally, how important is attending camp on the part of a high school athlete? Most high school athletes think that just playing high school football is going to be good enough. What's your opinion of scouting camps? And then my second question has to do with the eyeball test. As a parent and as a former player, one of the things you always hear is how important is my kid's size, strength, and speed. How do you feel about the eyeball test as far as evaluating athletes? And then what do you use to evaluate athletes?
Sure. So number one, I think camps are very important. And I think if you don't want to listen to me on that, I think you can definitely go back through the years and pull up who went to, Reg, I know you attended some of the camps at North Central. See how many kids got offered out of that camp, or pull up our reports out of the Lindenwood mega camps in St. Louis the last 2 years and just see how many guys got offered out of those camps. The proof is in the pudding. I don't think that it's not a magic button. I think a lot of kids and parents might think I can just show up to these camps and I'll get offered. That's not the case. But if you have some ability and you're under the radar, there's no doubt that that's a great place for you to be discovered. That's not to say that game film isn't important, but I think it's proven year after year after year that colleges are offering a lot of guys at these camps. So from there, the eyeball test. I mean, I think that, and I want to say this carefully because I don't want to discourage guys who don't pass the eyeball test, but at the same time, I think that the media and other places have tried to portray guys who are underdog stories because those are cool, and that's great and that's inspiring. But for the most part, football is a game that is played by big, strong, fast people. So for the most part, the majority of guys who are going to get recruited at a high level, especially at the very tip-top kind of Power 5 level, those are going to be the guys who not only can play, but also look the part. They have the basic size and physical requirements to play the position. So that is something that we look at, but I think more importantly, when you ask what we kind of look for and what we put into our evaluations, I think athleticism on top of that is very important. You look at how many guys get drafted that were outstanding multi-sport athletes, how many skill guys ran track. There's even big guys, linebackers that ran track in high school, defensive ends that ran track. And that's a common theme as we study the draft classes to kind of see where we hit and missed. A lot of guys are, if you have an offensive tackle that's 6'7" that also was pretty good at basketball and threw very well for the track and field team, usually that guy is going to end up being a pretty good college football player and probably a draft pick as well.
Well, elaborate on that.
If you were to give a wholesale evaluation of just between size and speed, what would you say in your evaluation is more important, size or speed?
I think speed. I think and I'll say this.
I'm so glad you said that. I am so glad you said that, because after 10 years in the NFL, people always have a misconception of what the NFL is. It's a bunch of lumbering big guys. No, these guys are graceful athletes. I remember when we played the Bears and everybody saw Brian Urlacher come out of the locker room. The first thing they say is, well, he's really not that big. It's speed that's most important.
No doubt. Well, you can't be, obviously you can't be like really, really undersized, but I think that there's a lot more undersized guys who have ever made it than there are guys who can't run that ever made it. The guys who can't run just don't play. If you're undersized, you can make up for it in other departments. If you're not fast enough, there's really not a whole lot you can do to make up for that. So we go evaluate all the time. Every high school team will have some kid out there that's 6'5", 6'6", 6'7", 300 pounds. Every single roster probably has a guy like that. But there's only so many of those kids that can bend and move and change directions the way that you need to be able to play at the next level. So I think even though size is important, I think speed is much more, especially with the way that football is being played today.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back to your camp analogy with the question Oliver asked you. When you see these camps, I was always told, don't just go to the camp blind, right? Go to the camp, talk to the coaches first, let them know who you are so that they're kind of waiting for you. That's kind of how it worked out in our situation in my household. We kind of figured it out. How would you respond to that? Would you think you could go there blind as an athlete and get noticed, or do you think they should be reaching out to the colleges before?
Yeah, you can go in blind and in some cases make it, but again, that's a very small percentage. You increase your odds significantly if the school knows that you're coming. They know who you are ahead of time. They know they've evaluated your film ahead of time. They have a relationship with you and your family a little bit. They know what you are coming in. So there have been situations where a kid just shows up at a camp and the school goes, oh, who's that guy? And ends up offering him. But those are much more rare than the guys who they know coming in. And I think that there's so many kids at these camps, at most of these camps. In some cases, there's 400 or 500 kids that anything you can do to stand out and separate yourself from the pack. And if they already know you coming in, if they've already shaken your hand in the line to register when you're registering, and they know, oh, that's Reggie Florima from Naperville Central. By the time you get out on that field with 500 other kids, they already know who you are. And I think that's also, honestly, a big part of this thing too.
Mm-hmm. Now, would you say, let's do the analogy with the NFL. You get these guys that maybe they're not the best testers, but they have great film, so they don't do the combine. Would you say the camps could hurt a kid if they go out there and maybe they look great on the field, but they don't run a great 40, or maybe their short shuttle is not that great? How would you respond to that?
Sure. I mean, I think that a bad 40 time or bad testing times, or even I think showing up at camp and not being as big as you said you were, you've been listing yourself at 6'5", and you show up and you're 6'2.5", those things can affect a kid and hurt them in their recruitment. But I think that's why it's important to be prepared for those things. And also, I've also seen had coaches say, well, this guy didn't test real well at our camp, but we still liked him off our game film, and we liked that he came and competed we think we can get them faster. So there's always that scenario too. There's always kids that go there and don't run well, and coaches will say, you know what, we still like them and we think we can develop them more. It's a little bit different than, say, a bad NFL combine, because I think that the NFL is inheriting athletes that are older and a little bit closer to their ceiling, where these coaches are evaluating guys who are 15, 16 years old and can still get a lot faster or stronger over the next several years.
Yeah, I've always kind of advised, I'm a little bit of a cautious person. I always tell guys, don't send someone to a camp they're not ready yet. If you don't know what their 40 is, don't find out at the camp, right? Go there, train for it, and do whatever, because people start to look at a kid, especially if a kid comes in and he does have some good size and he catches someone's eye, and then they look and then you run a 4.9, but you're a ball carrier, like, I don't know, this dude slow. Once slow gets in your mind about somebody, it's hard to get it out. So I say, look, if you're not ready before a lot of kids are going after 8th grade. I'm like, you got to be a specimen for them to really care. Then after freshman year, I'm like, you don't want to wait until senior year, but you don't want to get there too soon if you're not ready to test well. That's been my philosophy.
I'm with you for a number of reasons. First of all, I think putting a guy out there too early can hurt them, because you only get one chance to make that first impression, and I've seen it be very difficult for a kid to change the initial evaluation the school got of them when he was young. And I also think you start to put that kid under a microscope at a time where maybe he's not ready. So we've seen a number of kids over the years who start to get recruited in the 8th and 9th grade and not really end up turning out to be what everybody thought they would be. And I think that's part of the reason that's why. And then also, that's why I recommend a lot of kids, skill athletes, even if you're not maybe the fastest guy in your school, you should still go run track. You learn how to run. You learn how to do certain things that will translate into when you're being tested on your 40. Also, some of those outside camps, people say, do I really need to go to a camp if there's no college coaches there? And I always think, yeah, at least go to a couple, because that's where you learn how to run a shuttle. That's where you maybe will run an L cone for the first time. And that way, Lovie Smith or Brian Kelly or one of those guys isn't standing over you the first time you run one of those drills.
Mm-hmm. That's a good point.
Alan, now, how does a parent get in contact with you if they want to put their kids in the mix and try to get their kids some exposure? How does a parent or an athlete get in touch with you and put their film out there and get you to evaluate them?
Yeah, so our emails are all available on our staff contact page. So I handle the Midwest. So if a parent is listening and is in Illinois, Michigan, Indiana, Wisconsin, etc. But then also it's regionalized. So if you're from Florida or whatever, our contacts, email addresses are all on there, and we're checking those all the time. Also extremely available via Twitter. My DMs are open, and that's been a way that kids and parents have preferred to communicate a lot recently. So you can get me on there, and also understand that I get a lot of messages, so I may not respond immediately right away, but I try to set aside time every day to start going through those and clicking on the film and watching them and responding to as many of those as I can. But those are probably the two best ways.
Along those same lines, how would you suggest some of these kids go after the colleges? I see people tag a bunch of college people in their Twitter account. I see people try to find phone numbers and send them a text message or email. What do you think is the most effective way? Because these guys have got to be bombarded.
Oh yeah, it's kind of the same with me. I think there's a certain level. There's like the right amount of constantly contacting them, and then there's a thin line between that and just like too much bombarding them with the same kid, and eventually I think some of them kind of get sick of seeing the same name pop up over and over again. So I think there's a right balance there. But with college coaches, first of all, I think a lot of kids don't understand that if you're a younger prospect, like if you're a freshman, sophomore, and you try to contact a coach, even if they love your film, most of the time they're not allowed to message you back based on the rules. Yeah. So if you don't hear back, don't get discouraged. If you're older, they can respond back to you. But I think email and Twitter are the two most effective ways. Tagging them on Twitter is good. If you're able to DM them, great. Otherwise, my tip for most kids is find out who your position coach is and find out who the recruiting coordinator is at the school. And then every college has an email directory. You can find any of their email addresses through searching their names in that directory. And they may all hate me for telling a bunch of kids this trick, right? But you can do that and find their emails and get a hold of them that way.
Mm-hmm. How important is it that they
one of the things that I think is important that you mentioned is knowing the calendar. Making sure that you know the calendar, when a live period is, so on and so forth. And I'm really glad you mentioned that.
Yeah, because I think a lot of kids get discouraged or think that coaches are ignoring them when really the coaches, a lot of the time, I know these coaches want to respond to these kids and they just can't. So understanding that is great. But then also getting to one of their camps, that's a great way to get in front of them. And provided, like, you take into account the things we said earlier about being ready, but camps are a finding ground and a proving ground for a lot of these schools too.
Mm-hmm. What about these paid recruiting services or something like that, or just some of these advocates that kind of self-proclaimed advocates you have? You think that's a good method, or are you better off working through your high school coach?
I think you're much better off working through your high school coach. I don't think that if you're in the situation that you should be, nobody should have to pay for a recruiting service. And it's not necessarily always just your head coach. I know every high school has it set up differently. Some schools have a position coach that is assigned to help with recruiting. That's great. Some kids will pay for training, and in some cases that helps them. But in that case, you're also getting the training. Paying just for recruiting, I think, I've never really seen that make a kid take off for the most part. The kid, the success stories that I know were a kid working with their parent or their college coaches and being diligent about getting in front of those coaches. I don't think paid recruiting services in general, I guess you never can say never, but in general, paid recruiting services are not the way to go.
That's a hard truth right there. I think that's very controversial with some people. They get kind of desperate and they think there's not enough movement, and then that's the way they go. So I do think a lot of people, everyone wants their kid to go D1 Power 5, right? And then I think when that's not happening, they start to get some other level of offers. At what point do you think a kid needs to start pursuing the other levels, 1AAs, D2s, and things of that nature, or FCS, I think it's called.
Yeah, well, understand this. I've seen guys that you would not think are Division I Power 5 guys get an offer right up until the week or two before signing day. But as we kind of talked about, I think is the theme of when I talk to kids and parents, like, don't compare yourself to those kind of Hail Mary miracle success stories. If that happens to be you, then great, but you can't bank on that. So if you're in your, really now with how early recruiting moves, if you're in your junior year, you don't have a lot of bigger schools, Division I schools talking to you, or you don't have an offer by that point, I think you need to start researching FCS schools and even D2 schools. I don't think that means that you won't get a Division I offer. There's a lot of guys who reach out to those FCS schools, get those offers, and then you have a spot at those places. And then once the D1s start coming in, then you can look at those schools too. But at least you have the safety net of knowing a variety of schools. I also think it helps to have a relationship with some of those schools, because you never know where those coaches are going to end up. They move around all the time. An FCS coach may be an FBS coach in another year, or you may go to an FBS school and you don't like it and you want to transfer down to an FCS school. Then at least you have some relationships with those guys, and maybe you've visited some of those schools. So if you need another option later in your career, you're not behind the eight ball.
So glad you said that, because I don't think a Power 5 school's ever been scared off of a kid because he has an FCS offer, or because, I think people think they're going to get like typecasted or something like that.
Yeah, I've had kids get an FCS offer first and reach out to me and ask, should I even report this? Because I don't want to get pigeonholed as a D2 guy or an FCS guy. And no, there's absolutely, if a Power 5 school thinks you're good enough, there's nothing really that will scare them off other than like bad grades or other red flags. But an FCS definitely won't scare them off.
That's good.
Well, Alan, in conclusion, can you give everybody your information just real quick? I know they can find it on Twitter, on your website, but give us your email address and means of contact. And very, very, very thankful you came through today. We appreciate it, and because there's a lot of parents lost right now because of this unusual situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So my Twitter is @AllenTrieu, ALLENTRIEU. And they can also email me at atrieu, ATRIEU, 2 @gmail.com. So they can reach out and have any questions that they need answered. And like I said, I'll do my best to get to them all.
Before we let you go, the way I started connecting with Alan is he posted a stand-up comedy routine that he had. And I listened to it. And for young fathers out there, I think you guys will get a kick out of it. How can people listen to your stand-up comedy?
It's on Apple Music, and it is also on iTunes. The album is called A Cry for Help, so you can search that out. And it's funny that you mentioned that, because in the comedy world, I'm the kid. I'm the one trying to send my tape out to people and have them like, please evaluate my tape, please listen to this, please let me know where I stand. And sometimes they pick somebody else. I'm like, man, you picked that guy? So I kind of understand where the kids come from in my other world here.
Well, I enjoyed it when I listened to it. Anybody who's has the opportunity to do it, please do so. Alan, thanks you so much for showing up. Hopefully we can have you back on the show again someday.
Sounds great, guys. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Alan, thanks, buddy.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me, guys. It was cool.
All right. We're out, guys. Cue the music.
But now the day has come. But let you know where I'm coming from. Yeah. Yeah, baby. Look what you done for me. Yeah, baby. Set my heart free. Yeah, baby.
Alan, appreciate the time, bud. Thank you.
Of course. Appreciate you. I didn't talk about it on the show. Giant Steelers fan, so I remember you.
Yeah, there we go. There we go. That's a classic.
Terrible towel hanging out.